Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NASE Preferred Supplier webinar, Barking Up the Right Tree with OraCMU and Oral Probiotic for Fresher Dog Breath. I'm Bill Parker with NASE, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce Alexis Collins, Director of Product and Brand Strategy with Stratum Nutrition. Alexis is a scientist, researcher, and communicator with a broad experience in nutrition and medicine. She has direct experience with product development of dietary supplements, developing marketing and sales strategies of supplement ingredients and products, evaluating research, and presenting the science and benefits of dietary supplement ingredients. Her specialties include evaluating, reviewing, and discussing clinical research, nutrition, nutritional supplement ingredients, dietary supplement research, and experiment protocol. And her favorite quote is, "Science is not finished until it's communicated." And with that, I will turn it over to Alexis.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me today on the NASC webinar. I'm very excited to bring one of our latest ingredients, OraCMU, to you all and dive into the science behind this very, very interesting oral probiotic that's actually active in the mouth and also has clinical research demonstrating that it improves breath odor in dogs and humans, which is how I originally came across it. So just a little bit about Stratum Nutrition first. At Stratum Nutrition, we take the quality of both our manufactured and our distributed ingredients on both the human and the pet side of the industry very seriously. Quality is one of our core values. We hold our ingredients to some of the highest standards in the industry. We and our ingredient partners adhere to GMP standards in the manufacturing process, and we are an NASC preferred supplier. All right, so I did promise to get into the science behind OraCMU and how it works to improve dog breath odor. But before I start reviewing the actual results of the canine research on OraCMU, I think it is important that I review what exactly causes these foul odors that are being emitted from the mouths of some of our canine companions. So, what causes bad dog breath? At the core of most cases of bad dog breath, otherwise referred to as halitosis, is the presence of undesirable bacteria on the teeth and tongue. And these undesirable bacteria, because there are good bacteria in the oral cavity of canines as well that aren't causing any issues and are actually helping stabilize what we call the oral microbiome in canines. But there are undesirable bacteria as well. And these bacteria are the ones that produce gases called volatile sulfur compounds, otherwise known as VSCs. And these bacteria gases that we are smelling on the breath are what we all recognize as bad dog breath. And the most notorious VSCs out there are hydrogen sulfide, methyl mercaptan, and dimethyl sulfide. And the leading bacteria that are responsible for producing these VSCs are gram-negative anaerobic bacteria, which can include Fusobacterium, Porphyromonas bacteria, otherwise known as P. gingivalis in humans. You may recognize that term, P. gingivalis. That's a prominent odor-causing bacteria in the human mouth, and then it's very similar. Compadres P. gule, which is prominent in the dog oral cavity, and then Treponema and Bacteroides species are also responsible for producing these VSCs. So then when it comes to dog breath, halitosis in dogs is not just a cosmetic issue. Yes, it's unfortunate for us as the owners, but truly the issue of halitosis in a dog is the first warning sign of a larger problem. So these VSCs that I talked about on the previous slide are actually cytotoxic to oral tissues. So what is producing that foul odor is also harming the oral tissues in the canine mouth, and this can lead to serious dental issues. In fact, VSCs can also be transported via the bloodstream to other organs in the body, and they can contribute that way to other problematic systemic issues. So halitosis is really the first chance for dog owners to notice that there is a serious problem happening with their canine companion. And this is a pretty prevalent issue. Serious dental issues in canines have a prevalence of at least 80% in dogs over 3 years of age. So this is something that a majority of dog owners are dealing with and trying to, figure out how to take care of. And then this prevalence of serious dental issues in dogs increases with age, which makes sense, but it can also be predominant in toy breeds from even earlier life stages. So there are current treatments. Treatments exist to care for canine dental health. The issue isn't necessarily the treatments so much as the compliance of the owners to give these treatments to their canines. So as far as current treatment goes, brushing teeth, the teeth of dogs, is obviously up there as the number one most preventative way to care for canine dental health. However, in a Swedish study, 1 in 4 dog owners experienced difficulties when they were trying to inspect their dog's teeth, and this was mainly because their dogs were uncooperative. Then in a second Swedish study, and these were both published in, I believe, 2022 and 2023, the second Swedish study, researchers found that owners of dogs that had serious dental issues did tend to follow dental care recommendations better than just the general dog owner population, but that preventative care was still inadequate for more than half of the dogs in the study. So there's definitely a need for resources to address infrequent tooth brushing, not just in the general dog population, but also in the population of dogs that actually have serious dental issues. And dog owners are aware of this TikTok video with 3.2 million views. I'm not going to play it here, but it's just very, very clear that some pet owners are either unable to brush their dog's teeth, or they are just unaware of how beneficial it can be. For the owners that do rely on alternatives to toothbrushing, there are dental chews out there and chew toys and specialized diets. There are also probiotics out there that are making oral health claims as well, that are being digested in dog food. These probiotics are focusing more on digestive issues that can lead to bad breath odor in dogs. Whereas, just to clarify, OraCMU is active in the actual oral cavity of the canine, and I will get into that in later slides. So once the buildup is severe enough, then the next step that has to be undertaken is dental scaling. And that is where the plaque is literally scraped off of the dog's teeth. It requires anesthesia. This is a stressful process for both the canine being put under anesthesia and going to the vet, and the owner, because the average cost in the US for dental scaling across all states, the average was $300. So you can imagine what the upper limits might be for owners in some states. And then it also is good to mention that toothpaste and disinfectants that are commonly used, if they are antibacterial, they are most likely wiping out the good bacteria that I mentioned previously with the bad. And this isn't necessarily what we want for the most stable oral microbiome in the dog's mouth. We want to be able to balance the bacteria in the mouth where the bad aren't taking over and causing havoc and releasing too many VSCs, and the good bacteria actually help us accomplish that. So moving on to exactly what is OraCMU. So OraCMU is a trademarked oral probiotic strain called Weissella Siberia, CMU, because it was discovered at the Chana Medical University in South Korea. So Weissella Siberia, it's not one of the more popular species of probiotics. You all might be familiar with Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium, but Weissella Siberia actually is very popular and very well known for being essential in the fermentation of kimchi, which is that spicy Korean sauerkraut that is now becoming quite trendy in the States. But this specific strain of Weissella Siberia, OraCMU, was not isolated from food. It was actually isolated from the mouths of healthy kindergarten children in South Korea. And multiple cultures were taken from these children's mouths. And the researchers were looking for the strain that was the most outstanding in being able to naturally produce hydrogen peroxide, which we all know hydrogen peroxide has its own name made for helping with dental care and oral health. So OraCMU was the strain that outdid all of the others in its ability to naturally produce hydrogen peroxide. And from there, our ingredient partner has now had 9 human clinical trials done that demonstrate the ability of OraCMU to help reduce bad breath and help reduce VSCs and support oral health in various healthy adult populations. And in addition to that, and this is what we're all interested in, there are actually 2 canine clinical trials that also demonstrate the ability of OraCMU to help reduce bad breath and VSCs and support oral health in dogs. So we like to say that we are just helping reduce dog breath all around. So let's get into how OraCMU actually works. So OraCMU works via multiple mechanisms of action. Like I said before, oral probiotics are a great alternative solution to halitosis because, especially with OraCMU, it's able to target odor-causing bacteria while sparing the helpful other oral bacteria in the microbiome. So there's a certain oral microbiome balance that can be preserved when you consider OraCMU as an option for canine dental care. So one of the mechanisms of action that OraCMU has is that it produces, like I said, high levels of hydrogen peroxide, which naturally hydrogen peroxide breaks up bacteria biofilms. So this is basically the film, the substance that undesirable bacteria put down that helps them colonize and stick to where they want to be. And hydrogen peroxide naturally breaks that up, which is great. We want the canine mouth to be inhospitable to these bad bacteria. OraCMU also produces bacteriocin-like compounds which target undesirable odor-causing bacteria. So these compounds that are produced by OraCMU, in addition to hydrogen peroxide, also make it an undesirable environment for these VSC-producing bacteria in the canine mouth. Third, OraCMU colonizes the canine oral cavity quickly and effectively. And by colonizing, meaning that OraCMU is getting into the canine oral cavity and it's flourishing, it's multiplying and it's growing. It's basically taking all of the parking spots in the oral cavity away from those undesirable odor-causing bacteria that we don't want in there, causing bad breath. And then lastly, and very interestingly, OraCMU also specifically reduces VSC production by these odor-causing bacteria, not necessarily killing off the bad bacteria, but literally reducing their production of these volatile sulfur compounds that are causing nasty dog breath. So very, very interesting there. We have all of our ingredient research, by the way, from in vitro, in vivo, to canine to human in our customer sharing folders, which are available if you contact me or anybody on the Stratum Nutrition team. You can also go to our website, stratumnutrition.com, and become members of our Knowledge Center, and you will have access to all of our ingredient research there, just to put that out there. All right, then. So let's go into the canine research on OraCMU. So there are 2 canine studies on OraCMU that basically follow the same protocol with a few changes. So this first study was a 6-week placebo-controlled study done on 18 female and male beagles, ages 1 to 3 years, that were on a commercial dog diet. And this study had 3 experimental groups, just to make it clear, because this can get a little confusing looking at the graphs, because there were basically 2 control groups. There was the positive control group, which was just a placebo group, but then there was a negative control group, which meant that these dogs had scaling done 1 week prior to the experiment. So they had dental scaling where all of their plaque was removed, and then they were put on placebo for the experiment. And then there was the treatment arm with OraCMU in 3 different doses. So OraCMU in powder form, and then 3 different doses. So there was a low dose called CMUL, which was our 20 million CFUs of OraCMU. And CFU stands for colony forming units, because that just means this is a colonizing oral bacteria. The medium dose of OraCMU was 200 million CFUs, and then the high dose of OraCMU was 2 billion CFUs. So these 3 doses were looked at in the study. And both the treatment and placebo powders were mixed with 2 milliliters of saline and then immediately administered, because you can't have a live oral bacteria sit in water. It has to be mixed with water and then immediately administered to maintain viability. Then they were immediately administered orally via syringe directly to the canine's teeth. So that was the protocol of this first study that I'm going to go into. And then what they were examining were three different parameters with the canines. So the first parameter was organoleptic evaluation, otherwise known as sensory evaluation. So for this particular evaluation arm of the study, a trained examiner was assessing the odor of the dog's breath from a 2 centimeter distance from the dog's mouth. And then this trained examiner recorded the scores, with 0 being no odor to 5 being a severe odor in the breath. And then the second parameter that was measured in this canine clinical trial was measurement of VSCs. So volatile sulfur acids, what you're seeing here is, this is the human version of the same protocol. So what had to happen was that the canines had to be breathing through their nose for 30 seconds, and then using a syringe, like here, air was collected from the actual oral cavity of the dogs, and then that air in the syringe was inserted into a machine called a gas chromatograph, which can detect levels of specific volatile sulfur compounds. So that was one other evaluation that was done in this study. And then lastly, they measured different clinical indicators of oral health. So they looked at calculus, which is otherwise known as tartar or hardened plaque. They looked at plaque itself, and then they looked at the gingivitis index, which obviously is not a dietary supplement claim, but I'm including it in this presentation just for education purposes. All right, so then the results. So for the sensory evaluation, the breath sniff test, if you will, the results were as follows. Actually, at week 2, the lowest dose of OraCMU ended up having a significantly lower score versus placebo. So what you're seeing here, sorry, let me back up a little bit for this graph, because I do know that it's a little bit small here. What you're seeing on the far left, this is the negative control. So this is the dental scaling plus placebo group. The black bar is just the placebo group, which you can see over the 6 weeks of this study. The breath odor was increasing in the dental scaling placebo group, and it was certainly increasing in just our regular placebo group. And then you have the 3 different doses of OraCMU, the lowest being next to the black bar, and then we have 200 million CFUs in the middle there, and then the highest 2 billion dose of OraCMU is on the far right. So at week 2, we did end up seeing the lowest dose of OraCMU actually had a significantly lower breath score versus placebo. But then at the end, because all of these groups were actually quite small, since our treatment group was spread across 3 different doses. So then by the end, we did end up regaining statistical significance versus placebo for all doses of OraCMU. So all doses of OraCMU produced better breath versus placebo by week 6, according to this organoleptic test. All right, secondly was the measurement of VSCs. And so the results of this study showed that there was a significant reduction in total VSCs. So this is what this chart is looking at. It's just total VSCs. We're not looking at them separately yet. So there was a significant reduction in total VSCs in all OraCMU groups versus placebo in as little as 2 weeks. So in as little as 2 weeks, those volatile sulfur compounds were significantly reduced versus placebo. And this significance was sustained through the end of the study, through the 6-week study. So very good impact on total VSC count. And then looking at what specific VSCs are actually being targeted. So looking at this, we have hydrogen sulfide up here, methyl mercaptan in the middle here, and the dimethyl sulfide at the bottom. As early as week 2, all OraCMU groups showed significant reductions in methyl mercaptan. So ding, ding, that's the one that we're really hitting hard on with OraCMU here. And that significance was sustained through week 6 of the study. Additionally, the middle dose of OraCMU, the 200 million CFU dose, showed a significant reduction in dimethyl sulfide at week 2 versus placebo. And then at week 6, the low dose and the high dose of OraCMU caught up and showed significant reductions of dimethyl sulfide versus placebo as well. And there were no significant differences in hydrogen sulfide between the experimental groups in this study. So then moving on lastly to the clinical indicators of oral health that were looked at. At week 4, the high dose of OraCMU exhibited a significant reduction in the gingivitis index versus placebo. So calculus is up here, plaque index is in the middle, and then gingivitis is at the bottom here. Additionally, at week 6, the high dose of OraCMU, the 2 billion CFU dose, showed a significant reduction in plaque index as well versus placebo. And then lastly, the calculus index scores showed no significant differences between OraCMU versus placebo in this first canine clinical trial. So then moving on to the second clinical trial, which, like I said, is going to have a very similar protocol to the first one that I just went through with some small differences. So in this second clinical trial that was published in 2019, this was also a 6-week placebo-controlled trial done on 18 female and male beagles, ages 1 to 3 years old, with a commercial dog diet. However, in this study, the second one, all dogs received a professional dental scaling 1 week prior to the start of the experiment. So you can almost think of it as they're all starting with a clean slate. And then there were 3 experimental groups in this study. So there was the placebo group, and then there was the treatment group with OraCMU. And instead of 3 different doses of OraCMU, they only looked at the lowest dose, which was the 20 million CFUs, and the highest dose, which was the 2 billion CFU dose of OraCMU. And again, the treatment and placebo powders were mixed with 2 milliliters of saline prior to being immediately administered orally via syringe to the canine's mouth once daily. So that was the delivery format for this study. And then they did look at the same outcomes for evaluation parameters. So there was the sniff test. There was the measurement of VSCs in the actual air in the dog's mouth. So the actual breath of the dog was measured as well for VSCs. And then they looked at the same clinical indicators. So tartar, calculus, plaque, gingivitis index. But then there was a 4th parameter that they were looking at in this second study, and that was an oral bacteria analysis. So in this case, they measured actual levels of OraCMU in the oral cavities of these canines. And then they also looked at the levels of 5 different periodontal pathogens, so undesirable bacteria that you don't want in your mouth, and 2 carriogens, so cavity-causing bacteria, were also analyzed. So let's get to it. All right, so for the sniff test, the high dose, the 2 billion CFU OraCMU dose, had significantly better breath scores versus placebo in as little as 2 weeks. And this reduction was sustained until the end of the study. You can see that here with the CMU-H, that is the 2 billion CFUs. The 20 million OraCMU dose, which is the CMU low dose, had significantly better breath scores versus placebo by week 4. So not that far behind. So that was showing us what we were seeing in the previous study as well. So then looking at the evaluation, the measurement of BSCs. So what we're looking at here, the black bar is the placebo group. The middle bar with the diagonal lines is going to be the low dose of OraCMU. So that's 20 million CFUs. And then to the right is going to be the high dose of OraCMU. So that's the 2 billion CFU dose. So by week 4, the total VSC concentrations in the high dose OraCMU group were significantly lower versus placebo. And here's week 4. And this significant reduction was sustained through the end of the study for the high dose of OraCMU. Looking at methyl mercaptan over here, by week 4, the low dose of OraCMU, which was 20 million CFUs, and the high dose of OraCMU, so the 2 billion CFU dose, had significantly reduced methyl mercaptan levels versus placebo. You can see that here. And this was sustained until the end of the study. So just remember, we're starting out with a clean slate here for the placebo group as well. So the significance that we're seeing here is post-dental scaling, which is very compelling. And then levels of hydrogen sulfide and dimethyl sulfide were lower in this study. Those are the two down here, but they did not reach statistical significance in the second study. So then looking at the clinical indicators of oral health, the results here were that the placebo group, so we're looking at here's calculus or tartar, here's plaque, and here's gingivitis index. And so looking at the plaque index, the placebo group showed a persistently increasing plaque index through the 6 weeks of this study post-dental scaling. Whereas if you look at the low dose of OraCMU and the high dose of OraCMU, they maintained the same values as the start of the experiment just after dental scaling, which is also very compelling and showing the effect of OraCMU helping preserve that clean slate. And then by week 4, the placebo group had an increased amount of plaque, enough to give us a statistically significant lower plaque index score versus placebo for both doses of OraCMU here. And then as far as the calculus index goes, that also increased over time, but it increased over time in all groups. However, at week 4, both doses of OraCMU were still significantly lower versus placebo. And then there was no significant change in the gingivitis index in the second clinical trial. All right, and then lastly, looking at the oral bacteria analysis that was done in this second trial, at week 6, so we have the nasties here that we just don't want. So we've got the nucleatum, the gingivalis, the intermedia, the forsythia, and then we have our OraCMU down here at the bottom, Weissella severia. So by week 6, the low and high dose of OraCMU had significantly lower levels of F nucleatum and P gingivalis versus placebo. And these are actually the more prominent odor-causing bacteria in the human mouth when it comes to producing foul halitosis, foul breath odor in humans. So it's interesting to see them decreased as well in dogs. And then at week 6, OraCMU levels were significantly higher for both the low and the high dose OraCMU groups versus placebo for Weissella severia. So obviously we are demonstrating that we are having effective colonization here of Weissella severia OraCMU. By week 6, it was significantly higher and had effectively colonized the canine oral cavity. All right. So that was a lot of different doses and a lot of different timetables between those two studies. So what I've done is I've put together a summary of the findings of these two canine clinical studies. So for organoleptic evaluation or sensory evaluation, 2 billion CFUs of OraCMU had a better sensory sniff test score versus placebo in as little as 2 weeks. The lowest dose of OraCMU had a better sniff test score versus placebo in as little as 4 weeks. And then all doses of OraCMU had significantly better sniff test scores of dog breath versus placebo in 6 weeks. Then for measurement of VSCs, all doses of OraCMU from 20 million to 2 billion had lower VSCs in as little as 2 weeks versus placebo. And then when it came to clinical indicators, 20 million and 2 billion CFUs of OraCMU, so the low and the high doses, significantly reduced the plaque index versus placebo, and the high dose of OraCMU significantly reduced the gingivitis index versus placebo in the first clinical trial. And then when it comes to oral bacteria analysis, both the low and high doses of OraCMU significantly reduced undesirable VSC-producing oral bacteria, P. gingivalis and F. nucleatum. And OraCMU was able to colonize the canine oral cavity successfully. So from those findings, we think that OraCMU can add some really standout claims to canine oral health formulas. This is an oral probiotic that is researched in dogs for dogs. It supports fresh breath. It targets the specific bacteria associated with bad breath and helps reduce the odorous gas linked to bad breath that is emitted from those bacteria. So it helps maintain a balanced oral microbiome. OraCMU helps support healthy teeth and gums and maintain healthy oral health, and it helps with plaque. So then getting OraCMU into a product for dogs, just a few formulating notes that we all need to be aware of. So OraCMU is a live probiotic. It is not a spore-forming probiotic. It must be handled in the way that all other live probiotics are handled, where it has to be kept away from heat and it has to stay dry. Those are the two requirements for it to stay viable. It can't stay wet for prolonged periods of time because that will reduce viability of the product. And it is room temperature stable, so it does not have to be refrigerated. And when it comes to OraCMU, the longer that OraCMU has contact with the oral cavity, the more colonization can occur. So the better efficacy, the better bang for your buck you're going to get out of OraCMU if you can let it linger in the oral cavity. So what we suggest for OraCMU is at time of manufacture with all live probiotics, you do have to put in an overage because there's always going to be a decline in viable probiotics over time in a product. That's just the way it is. So what we recommend, since there's such a span of efficacious dosing with OraCMU from 20 million CFUs all the way to 2 billion CFUs, our recommended dosing is that 2 billion CFUs is the included at time of manufacture dose. So that would equate to 20 milligrams of OraCMU, which is actually a very tiny efficacious dose. And by putting in 2 billion CFUs at time of manufacture, this will help us achieve that efficacious 20 million CFU low dose that will be remaining by product expiration. And this also helps us keep the dosing within the actual researched range that was in the study. So we don't need to go over and give our canines even more OraCMU than was actually studied, because there was no overage used in the study. These canine studies used the fresh stuff. So it was straight from fermentation and right into the dog's mouth. So there was no overage in the study. So we know the actual research doses that were being applied into the canines' mouths. Now, how to achieve this? You probably are all more creative than I am when it comes to delivery formats that our canine companions will like. You could certainly just have OraCMU in a capsule that's easily opened and sprinkled on top of a non-antibacterial toothpaste, sprinkled on a finger brush, and then just rubbed all over the gums would be great. And then just to note, there is a dairy allergen associated with OraCMU, and that's just from the fermentation process of OraCMU. All right, so in conclusion, OraCMU definitely stands out as a well-researched, unique probiotic strain that helps support oral health and better breath in dogs via activity directly in the oral cavity, not from the digestive system. So we have 9 human clinical trials that support the efficacy and safety of OraCMU. And like you saw, we have 2 canine clinical trials that support strong claims for better breath in as little as 2 weeks. And OraCMU is non-GMO, self-affirmed grass. It's manufactured in South Korea with one of our ingredient partners, and we distribute it here at Stratum Nutrition, headquartered in Missouri, USA. So I just want to thank you all for your time and attention, and give a little shout out to Bagel and Nutella, who are our latest Stratum Canine team members to join us. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexis. Go ahead and move right into the questions. Can you repeat how the probiotics were administered in the first study?
Sure. So in both studies, the probiotics were administered by taking the powder. So it was in a powder form, and then it was mixed with a very tiny amount of saline, 2 milliliters of saline, and then applied via a syringe to the dog's teeth. So that was the mode of administration for both of the clinical studies.
Another question. Was there any measuring of the good bacteria that was left in the dog's oral cavity after the testing was done?
That's an excellent question. And no, there wasn't a look at other helpful bacteria aside from just the administered Weissella severia in the second study.
Sure.
So they were just focused on the problematic ones in these clinical trials. But that's fantastic. And I'll recommend that to our ingredient partner for future research that's being planned.
Gotcha. Next question is, have you tested the impact through the rest of the intestinal tract?
No, the two studies looked at adverse effects or any adverse reports and recorded any that were there, and there weren't any. But it hasn't been tracked through the digestive system to see what other beneficial effects could occur from ingesting it.
Then can OraCMU survive in a liquid or a high moisture product?
No, unfortunately, when it comes to live probiotics that are not spore formers, we have to keep the water activity quite low. So you'd have to keep it dry until administration.
It, and in a real world usage, uh, do you is there a time limit for the end user to prepare the product and then get it into the
That's
dog's
that's
mouth?
that's a good question. And no, we don't want people, rushing and fussing to like mix these little tiny amounts of things together. No. Just as long as it's not what I say about not like doing it immediately upon administration just means we don't want the end user to mix it up and then leave it in the fridge for later or leave it on the counter, for later in the day. So a normal human style pace of mixing OraCMU with whatever or toothpaste or even just, your thing, like whatever, however you want to administer is absolutely fine. As long as the majority of it gets into the canine's mouth, you know, within a reasonable amount of minutes, and don't let it sit there for an hour. It's just not going to be as efficacious. You might still have some viable bugs there, but you'll lose efficacy if you wait too long.
So since your ingredient is manufactured in South Korea,
Mm-hmm.
are there any issues with importing the ingredient?
No, no issues at all. They actually, they've been importing into the States for a while, so this isn't anything new for them. And yeah, there's been actually no issues, no international shipping issues or anything like that.
And then, and as far as stratum is concerned, the ingredient can be sold in the U.S. as of right now,
Mm-hmm. Yep,
as far as
totally
FDA is
ready to
concerned.
go.
Okay.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, we just launched this ingredient more focused on the human side last November. So this is very, very new to the market, and we're just getting the word out right now. So everybody listening is you can kind of count yourselves as the first ones. So we're very excited to get any feedback we can on the ingredient.
How often would you recommend pet parents apply this probiotic to the dog's mouth?
Well, in the clinical study, it was applied once daily. So I would say
Okay.
follow the clinical study protocol and see what happens within 2 weeks of applying it once daily. And you might be, very happily surprised looking at the clinical outcomes.
What is the shelf life of finished good?
So when it comes to how you're formulating with a live probiotic, it's always going to depend, right, on your product and how you manufacture your own unique formulation. So OraCMU has a 2 year room temperature stable shelf life, but depending on what you're mixing it with, if you're going to get something with a little bit higher water activity in there, if you're packaging it in a canister that's going to be open and shut, you might want to consider a little bit of a lower shelf life, maybe more closer to 18 months, just because you're introducing a lot of moisture with some of these different delivery formats and applications. But the good news is that our ingredient partner, like, this is their baby. So they are very happy to advise any customers that want to work with us on recommendations, and, just working with you to make sure that you have the best stated, shelf life for your product that makes the most sense, depending on what formula you're using.
Could you repeat the probiotic strain name?
Weissella Siberia, CMU. I can do that one. Some of these pathogenic bacteria, I just skimmed right over their names during the presentation because, they're ridiculous. So,
and I'm making sure I'm asking this question correctly.
Sure.
What AWs would be considered low? I'm guessing
Oh,
what
water activity.
yeah.
So typically, I think it's below zero point 0.8 that we try to keep it for live probiotics. My brain's kind of conking out now, and I'm wondering if I'm missing a zero.
Okay,
So check back in with me. Please reach out to me, and
sure.
I'll get the correct number. But I think that's it.
Okay. What are the are what are the most common human formulations?
So for humans, it's been successfully formulated into what we would all call here in the States a chewable tablet. But instead of chewing it immediately, the clinical trials that were done on OraCMU in humans, they would have this chewable tablet, and immediately after brushing their teeth, before you go to bed, you have this chewable tablet in your mouth and you suck on it for as long as you can. Because remember, you get the most colonization happening the longer that you keep OraCMU in your mouth. And it works the same for humans as it does for dogs. So they would have this chewable tablet, suck on it, and then, eventually you bite it and fall asleep. But that's how the human clinical trials were done. And there are 9 of those. 5 of them did the chewable tablet. 2 of them did the powder directly to the mouth. So nothing else added in it. They just did straight OraCMU raw material into the mouth. And then 1 had subjects gargle with OraCMU. So the powder was mixed into gargle water immediately before gargling for 2 minutes. So a little bit of different delivery formats in the human side too, but mostly with the chewable tablet. Like I said, we're tackling dog breath all around with this ingredient. So it's a really fun one as far as marketing goes, I will say. But yes, we are happy to give you guys some samples. Just reach out to us, and we'd like to get this ingredient out there because it has some really, really interesting efficacy in both humans and canines.
I won't have you name names or anything like that, but are there any commercial pet products that already use OraCMU today?
Not yet, but soon. So, without giving too much away, like I said, we
Um,
just launched. Like this has been our launch into pet really has just kicked in the last month. So this is very fresh, hot off the presses type of
sure.
ingredient here.
Have you done palatability studies on the ingredient? And what flavor profiles does it have? And what is the appearance?
We did formulate just for our own sampling at the upcoming pet shows that are coming up. We wanted to be able to have people get their hands on OraCMU for pet. And since we only had human samples with chewable tablets, we did have it formulated into a sprinkle. So we did that. And then my good friends, Bermadoodle and Golden Retriever, were not opposed to the sample that we had put together by another partner who does formulations. So it's such a small dose of OraCMU because what we're talking about is 20 milligrams. And yes, I know canines are very sensitive when it comes to what they smell. And I think with that low of a dose, it could probably be successfully hidden even for the most sensitive canine. As far as the actual profile of the raw material, I was going to say, I think it's just a hint of ferment that you're going to get from it, but it's not a strong smelling material by any means.
We have a few more questions that have come up, and in the way of pricing and samples, and then your
Oh, you can reach
availability
out.
and your
Yes,
availability. So, I'm going to
please
get
reach
you the
out.
contact information of the folks that are asking me, so that you can
Perfect.
reach out to them.
Yes, definitely do. We are very excited for this material. So we'd love to talk to everyone. You can reach out to us on LinkedIn, any of our team members through the website as well. We're all available. So
Is there a variation for size of dogs that you would
So we were thinking about this, and like I said, with this launch, I'm very, very open to feedback because you are all the experts here that we're working with. So when we were considering dose per size, we actually decided that since this is active in the oral cavity, the difference there that we're really going to be encountering, we wouldn't want to do a dosing per milligram. We would just do a standard dosing of what was researched in the two canine clinical trials and stick to 2 billion CFUs being the top at time of manufacture dose. And then throughout that time period, depending on, what sort of formulation it is, we'd still achieve the efficacious 20 million CFUs by the end of shelf life with that overage, or not overage, with that high dose to start. But the difference in canine oral cavities per milligram, for milligram size, there was too much variance there. So we just decided to keep it a single dose. But please, reach out to me if there's any other thoughts on that, because like I said, you're all the experts.
Can you mention again the as far as the study was concerned? I think you mentioned the size and weight of the
Yes.
dogs that were used in the study. What were the sizes of those dogs?
Let me zoom that real quick. 9.8 with give or take 2 kilos.
And is there a safe upper limit not to exceed?
No, they've done their safety studies, but I don't know what there's no real like cap that's going to be gotten that would be of concern, but I can definitely go back and see what our total toxicity, like if there was total toxicity that was reached in animal research on the ingredient. Passing through grass, they would have had to have that. So I just need to go find that, but I'm sure it's abysmally high. So yeah.
I know you didn't mention any testing on cats, but is there can it be used in cats?
There is no testing in cats, so I can't provide you an answer on that, unfortunately. But that's someplace that we could maybe go in the future. So we're just getting started.
And then did you mention during the question came up the please state again where it's licensed. The product is manufactured in South Korea, is that correct?
Correct. That's where it's for the fermentation occurs in South Korea. So the actual fermentation and production of OraCMU occurs in South Korea, and then it's shipped over to the States.
With that, we'll go ahead and close things up. On behalf of NESC, I want to thank you for joining us today and for your participation.
Thank
Big
you.
thank you to Alexis and the Stratum team for sharing this. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexis.
Bye.